I have a question regarding the relationship between Hands and Voices and the Colorado Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. I understand the commission gave them the grant, and the first grant, I think, was tied to the symposium forums that we had.
Inspiring change,
Yes, that's, when you got the grant, and that was for initially 10,000. Okay, and then you most recently got, was it 10?
This was fiscal year 2013, so it was the past fiscal year. We're now in fiscal year 14, just to clarify.
Okay, so it was 10,000, and recently they were then given another 50,000, which is,
and that was matching funds.
and there's an addition of 25,000 to make it 75,000. So that's part of the commission's requirements, right? So it was matched. We had 50, and then the initial 10 makes 60,000. That was specifically geared towards inspiring change. Now, I did go to the symposiums in February and April, and I thought that the environment was extremely hostile. I mean, there were so many hearing people, and hearing people were making all the decisions, talking about deaf people, deciding for deaf people, being authorities on deaf people, and their word choices were very patronizing, extremely patronizing, and very much put down deaf people. And so what's Hands and Voices accountability? I mean, what's the mechanism to discuss this issue? Because I've tried to discuss it with Hands and Voices, and my conversations with Hands and Voices have not been effective. I've been kind of frustrated about that. So hang on a second, Jennifer, if you don't mind.
Well, I
It's
can
just
answer
that
your
I feel
question.
like CCDHH, has to have a number of ways that we might be able to voice our objections when decisions are being made about giving funds that are addressing issues for deaf and hard of hearing education. I was a deaf child. I went through the system. I was on the receiving end of the system, and it is us, not hearing people. It's deaf people who are on the receiving end of that system. And so hearing people making decisions without deaf people involved, I'm just wondering how it is that we might be able to file some concerns and state our objections to this process.
That sounds like you're directing that question to the commission.
Well, more likely, and when you're talking about the mechanism, because I don't see any accountability here.
You can simply write a letter stating your complaints to the commission and the commissioners, and we can pass that on as necessary.
So that's the one method?
That's one way.
And that's it? Okay, so
Uh-huh.
Hands and Voices has no accountability or need to respond to the deaf community? Is there none whatsoever?
I'm happy to take a trial at answering your concerns. I'm not sure if there's time in this meeting. It's not my meeting.
In the interest of.
Well, I have already sent you an email, and you actually never responded, Sarah, to my email. So I did email you, and include you are part of what I see as the group that I'm concerned about, that I have problems with.
Sarah, I would suggest that we establish a meeting. Why don't you, Ryan, meet with us, the core team, and we can discuss how we can find resolutions to your recommendations. And your recommendations and suggestions would help us greatly. I understand, you are stating a problem, but I would love to hear if you have any recommendations or solutions.
Sure.
So we'd be happy to sit down one-on-one with you and meet with you.
Meet with the core group, sure.
Yeah.
I'd be glad to do that.
It will also help too if you can stick to that group from beginning to end. To stick with that group of people, to stick with it, to make a difference.
I'm not sure which group you're referring to.
To the Hands and Voices people, you remember the workshops
The two.
that we had, the inspiring changes, you left in the middle of it. And so it's difficult to be able to educate them if you leave.
I was there until it became too much for me to handle, because it didn't even feel safe. It wasn't even a safe environment. So the space for me to be there needs to be safe, and it really wasn't a safe space.
Okay, and that's,
And after you left, we did bring up the issue of the cultural connection, and we discussed that issue. So I actually wished you had been there to see that. But I totally understand if it wasn't a safe space. I had a different feeling and a different opinion about it, but I understand. But let's sit down and let's have a dialogue and let's work together. And also, when you talk about space being safe and everything, let us know what would make it feel safe to you.
Okay, and I need to make it clear that I'm not just speaking for myself, there were several others that made that same comment.
Okay, sure, I would love to hear their ideas as well. Yes, Amy?
Kind of a response to that, is that as far as accountability, this meeting that we're having and this presentation that we're having is part of the accountability process for the grant that we've given, and we are expecting periodic reports during the process, so that is part of the accountability. Of course, in my mind, the accountability part is, the money piece, and so there's a different perception of accountability that this gentleman expressed. Changing the subject slightly, on the accountability piece, I saw that there's the contract with the Spark Institute, and I imagine there is a cost involved with that, and how does that work out? Is that part of the CCDHH funds, or is that part of the matching funds? How does that work out? The Spark Institute.
That's a very good question. We did decide, based on inspiring change, that it was important to have an independent facilitator. That was one of the higher marks that we had throughout those two events, that people said it was great to have an independent person facilitating the discussion and keeping people on track. So we thought, if we're gonna try to tackle as big a project as the blueprint and the role model program, that we wanted an independent facilitator. So I can share with you the budget, and of course you have it in the application. The funds for Spark policy is through the commission. Hands and Voices actually is receiving only 11,000 of the 50,000 grant, and we are giving much more in matching funds. I think I've probably already worked 40 hours this week on this. So it is part of the budget, but all of the organizations are also giving in kind, as well as some of our sponsoring organizations that wrote some parameters. I hope that helps answer your question. And for example, the blueprint document is nearly 100 pages, and Spark